This is from Peter Eggenberger, another email. Your claims about the way the U.S. is run seems plausible, but hasn't it always been run along similar lines since 1776? Furthermore, haven't elites always run societies?
Yes, and I think that one could argue that the battle for American democracy has been one long battle against those elites. That, you know, the Native Americans, African Americans, women, men without property, none of these people were invited to the constitutional conventions. It became a battle to open up American society, and these radical movements did that. So none of these radical movements achieved political power, but they were potent forces that the power elite had to reckon with. And I think the destruction of those movements has disempowered us. I mean, one could argue that in April 1968, the most powerful political figure in the United States was Martin Luther King. Johnson was scared to death of him. A year before, King had denounced the Vietnam War. And that's because when King went to Memphis, 50,000 people went with him. And I think we have to rebuild those movements. For those of us who care about democracy and care about justice, it's not our job to take power. You know, Julian Benda wrote a really great book, a French intellectual, called The Treason of Intellectuals. And he said that, you know, we have a choice in life. We can serve privilege and power, or we can serve justice and truth. And those of us who commit to serving justice and truth, the more we make concessions to those who serve privilege and power, the more we dilute the possibilities of justice and truth. And I think King, Malcolm X, Frederick Douglass, Randolph Bourne, Jane Addams, Eugene Debs, Mother Jones, you know, all of these people are figures that didn't make those concessions. And they never achieved formal positions of power, nor, frankly, did they ever strive to achieve formal positions of power. But they defended the interests of the dispossessed.
This tweet from NYC118 for you, Mr. Hedges. What do you think of Oprah's role in the culture and religious pursuit of personal wealth?
Negative. Oprah peddles this fantasy that we can have everything we want if we just focus on happiness and grasp that we are truly exceptional and dig deep enough within ourselves. And this is just magical thinking. It's not just peddled by Oprah. I don't want to pick on Oprah. The Christian right does it. Hollywood does it. Corporatism does it. Tony Robbins, self-help gurus do it. And it's just a myth. And frankly, it's a myth that's used to beat up on the poor. So there are no jobs in Camden. They used to make Campbell's soup in Camden. Even that's gone. Everything's gone. The schools are dysfunctional, gigantic dropout rate. The streets are unsafe. And to somehow tell a poor black child who's not getting an adequate education, not being raised in an environment that provides safety and security and nurturing, and upon that being tossed out into a city where there is no work, safety and security and nurturing, and upon that being tossed out into a city where there is no work, that they have to dig, is a look at the utter failure on the part of white theologians and the white church to respond to the lynching of black men and women, the reign of terror in Jim Crow South. And he argues correctly that the failure on the part of the white church to understand that the crucifixion of Jesus was a lynching meant that it couldn't see the power of the crucifixion. And fundamentally the message of the gospel itself within its midst. And it is really a stunning, stunning work. It's just filled with intellectual and emotional depth charges that whether you're a believer or not, you should pick up and read.
Melky Russell tweets into you, Mr. Hedges. Can Chris talk about the issues a black man might face saying the same things you're saying to a white audience?
Well, look at what's happened to Cornel West when he has gotten up and criticized Barack Obama. He's been attacked roundly, including within the black mainstream media. to get up and speak an uncomfortable truth, as Cohn has done throughout his life, is to have a lot of people turn away from you, to turn their backs on you. I've spent over 2 decades of my life living among people who are not white, and I speak Spanish as well as Arabic and French. And it has been a long process as a white, privileged male to begin to understand the reality of white supremacy, both as it manifests itself within the heart of the empire and on the outer reaches of empire. There are all sorts of assumptions that I can make that people who live in marginal communities and people of color cannot make. And it's important, I think, for those of us who come out of positions of privilege, and we spoke about the 2.5 years I lived in Roxbury, to put ourselves in these environments, because we're forced to confront our own blindness. And when you develop close relationships with people who suffer, whether they're Palestinian or whether they're African American in the inner city, when they become people you love and care about, and you see how entire systems are conspired against them, it becomes painful for you. But I think more importantly, you begin to see all the things that up until then you were unable to see. And that blindness, that there'll always be a kind of gulf between you and those who are oppressed. There will always be an inability to understand. You get as close as you can, you work as hard as you can, and then you accept your own deficiencies. And I think that very, very few people, one of the books you put up there was Litwack, the historian, who's really a remarkable historian, wrote a trilogy of books that I'm about to start. I teach in a prison. I'm about to start in a couple of weeks, and I'm teaching those 3 books. And it's the aftermath of the Civil War, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and then he wrote a beautiful sort of thin essay, contemporary essay called When is Free Free? But very few, Howard Zinn had it, but I think very few people managed to cross those lines. And it really takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of work, and a lot of self-reflection within themselves. Is really a way for us to turn our backs on the vulnerable and the poor, and to say, you are responsible. This is what the called cultural message is. You are responsible for your fate. And that's just the way the corporate state wants it, as it sheds job after job after job, as larger and larger segments of American society are reduced to subsistence level, without any kind of job security, without any kind of adequate health insurance, that it's sort of their fault because they haven't managed to tap into their inner strength. This is not only delusional, but in the end, I think, callous to the weak and the poor and to the working class.
Happy New Year. Thank you for what you do, sir. I appreciate what you said about men of privilege fighting for social justice. One such man, Mr. John Brown, who back in 1859 died along with his 6 sons for the cause of freedom and against slavery. Fast forward a couple of generations, and an Argentinian doctor went to Cuba to fight also for freedom. And I think in today's world, no matter where you are, what color your skin is, we can all see truth and we can all see injustice. And here in New York, there's a stop and frisk policy that plainly violates the Fourth Amendment. However, it's only brought against young, poor, black, and Latino men. And I think whatever your color is, as human beings, as Americans, we have to stand up for the Constitution, or for the spirit of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, that says God gives rights to men that men cannot take away. And again, thank you for what you do, and we would really appreciate you to help give voice to the Stop and Frisk movement in New York City against the violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Well, I've already told Carl Dix and Cornel West that the next time they go up and get arrested at a Stop and Frisk event in Harlem, I'll join them. So.
Chris Hedges is our guest this month on In Depth. We have about a half an hour left. Frida in Albany, California, thanks for holding. You're on the air.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Hedges, I'd like to know what your thoughts are on slavery, blacks in America, and reparations for the oppressed black population. I think something similar to the Marshall Plan would be in order.
Well, the civil rights movement was a legal victory, but it was not a victory in the sense that Martin Luther King and Malcolm X defined it, because they knew that if there was no economic justice, there could never be racial justice. And I think part of the power of the Occupy movement is that it picks up where the civil rights movement left off. That economic justice is the only way to finally overcome racial injustice. That for the bottom two-thirds of Americans, that the civil rights movement pulled about a third of the African American community into the middle class. But remember, if you look at the statistics, now as the bottom is falling out on the middle class, it's African American families that are suffering disproportionately, even within the middle class itself. And I think one could argue that for the bottom two-thirds of African Americans in this country, things are worse than they were when King marched in Memphis or Birmingham or Selma. And we as white Americans have a special responsibility because of the long night of slavery, the destruction of families, the destruction of religion, the destruction of language, the destruction of culture. Even their names were taken from them, in the same way that Germany has a kind of eternal responsibility for what was done to Jews during the Holocaust. And we have walked out on that responsibility. The best schools in this country should be in cities like Camden. The most intricate systems of familial and especially childhood support and medical care should be in the poorest aspects of this country, because these are people who have had the least chance to go anywhere. And one understands very quickly when you spend times in places like Roxbury or Camden, all of the institutions that work to keep the poor poor. Rents in cities like Camden are staggeringly high. Any kind of ability to sustain yourself within the informal economy, which often revolves either around, and families are split. You're either working for the police or in the correction system, or oftentimes you're on the street trying to make money selling drugs. The prison industrial complex and what it has done to African Americans, as the great poet Yusuf Komunyakaa has written, the cell block has replaced the auction block. And that's part of the reason I teach in a prison, because these people have had no chance. And they know that when they get out and they apply for a job, even if they can find a job to apply for, they have to check that box saying they were a felon, that they're stigmatized, that they can't vote, they can't get loans, their credit rating is destroyed. The last time I taught there, I taught American history. What I did is bring in copies of Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, which fortunately nobody in the prison vetted, and taught it when Zinn is particularly conscious of what African Americans have suffered throughout American history. But there were days I just walked out into the parking lot of prison and just wept, because there were so many great minds, so many great kids that tend to be young, who thirst for knowledge, who wanted a life, and I understood, but more importantly, they understood all of the walls that had been built around to deny them that. So I think when you use the word reparations, I think yes, not in terms of maybe cash checks, but in terms of building social programs. Lyndon Johnson made a step towards this, towards bringing these people back into the embrace of the country as a whole.
Chris Hedges is the author of 9 nonfiction books. In 2002, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning came out. What Every Person Should Know About War in 2003. Losing Moses on the Freeway came out in 2005. American Fascists, 2006. When Atheism Becomes Religion, 2008. That's when Collateral Damage came out as well. Empire of Illusion, 2009. The best-selling Death of the Liberal Class in 2010. His most recent, The World as It Is, came out in 2011, and coming out in June 2012 is
Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, that I'm doing with the great comic artist Joe Sacco. So a lot of it, 50 pages, will be illustrations and comic panels.
TV's in-depth program.
Thanks for having me.